Hello and welcome to the Old Garage number 20. I'm Wild Bill and this is Bo. Bo is being very right now clingy and he just wants to be with his people. So that's Bo. So I guess we're doing this together, aren't we? Okay, he's on my knee. Okay, there's a Bo. Meow. Meow. All right, well, we have some questions. Of course, we also have some silliness. Besides just this was unexpected. And shout out, so let's get on to the questions. I've got a few from James MacArthur. We'll stack them around. But he was saying that when I was talking to some of the people down at the Franklin Car Museum, which is out in Tucson, Arizona, some of them thought that the Franklin was a much easier car to drive than the Packard. I think, though, they were talking about cars from the 30s and 40s. As compared to modern cars today, how much more difficult were cars of this era to drive? Well, it depends on how far back you go. As you kind of mentioned in the question, 30s and 40s, things were, you had synchromesh, most cars had that for their manual transmissions. You started seeing, actual automatic transmissions started to exist then. Many cars started having automatic advance at this point, so that having additional controls for advancing and retarding were coming out of the picture. Once you get prior to World War I, the amount of controls that were needed to do had a lot to do with the type of engine it had. Electric cars were very easy to operate. It was just release the brake and you have a throttle and a brake, and it was pretty straightforward. Not the case with gas or electric. Most of the things that we think about when operating a car, like how often the engine's getting oil, this is things that you would have to do manually in many of these cars of that era. Whether to advance and retard the engine, how to choking the engine as well. There were a lot of different controls. You had controls also like you had your exhaust cutout switches, and valves and pedals. You had a lot of different things that you had to do to the engine. We're going to talk about those processes in the future on a lot of cars, but yeah, it did take a lot more work from the driver to operate those vintage cars, and you go back to the point where you have several different brake controls and such. So yeah, it was a lot harder to run. Now I got a question. This is from Craig Hagenbrook, and he says, out of curiosity and a bit of a joke as well, did anyone ever design a car with the idea of Flintstoning? By that I mean the person had to use their legs for propulsion, or maybe pedals, like push bike pedals and not accelerator pedals. The answer is yes. Oddly enough, this was attempted in the 16th century in China, and we don't know who specifically designed and built it, but we knew it was, one of the emperors, and he said this would be a great idea. And so what he'd do is have a car, but he would have a number of slaves on the car that were either holding it and running it pure Flintstone style, or had a series of pedals. Actually, both were done on this particular vehicle. We don't know who built it. It was, we only have, a few artistic depictions of the event and the fact that this guy actually rode in this thing. But yeah, it was done, but it kind of defeats the purpose, just get a bicycle at that point. Okay, got another question, another James MacArthur. He says, what was the most expensive car from the vintage era that made it into regular production, and why? Well, let's kind of lock down most expensive car. Let's talk about the chassis, because when you're looking at cars of the vintage era, the high-end luxury cars, typically what you did was you bought a running chassis from the company, and then you would take that running chassis from, from Rolls-Royce, or from Peerless, or Grafenstieft, or Spanosuesa, Isotta Fraschini, whoever, and you would take that to a coach builder, who would then put the actual body on the car, the fenders, the seats, uh, the windshields, all of those sort of things. And so that was a separate expense, since in many cases was just as or even more expensive than the chassis price of the car itself. A good example would be the 1910 Brook that was made into the Swan car. I mean, the Brook chassis itself was expensive. It was about a $6,000 car at the time, but that chassis was 3 times the price of it. So, but regular production expensive car, as far as we go with the chassis, that's going to be pretty much the Silver Ghost of Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost was in production for many years. I mean, I haven't done Rolls-Royce yet. Don't worry, I'm getting there. But that chassis in 1907 was almost $12,000. That's a lot of money. And that was enough to buy several houses, and that's just for the chassis, not including anything else. No seats, no windshield, no trunk, no fenders, nothing. It's just running chassis. But that's close in line with a lot of other folks that were out there. I mean, I mentioned DeSoto Faustini. I mean, those were very expensive, in the 10,000 range. Graf de Stief was in that range. Your Model 66 Pure Zeros were expensive. Your Cadillacs were expensive, but the Cadillacs weren't coach built technically. Well, technically they were in one sense, because they did use Fisher, and eventually Fisher became part of General Motors, but they were still of that same style coach work vehicle. So yeah, it's going to be the Silver Ghost. Okay, here's one. From Gabriel F. It says, what do you think it would have taken for hybrids and or electric cars to stay as a common format option through the 20th century? It would have taken a whole lot of manufacturing acumen. The thing with hybrids is that, it's one thing to have the technology to do something. It's another thing to have the technology to mass produce something. And that was a lot of the issue that was going on, because there are a lot of the specialized miniaturization of both motors and batteries that have to be done when you're making a true hybrid, and also the regenerative features, all of the controls, the electric or electronic controls. These are all things that in modern technology, it makes it very easy to manage. I mean, we have computers. We can plug a computer to run the hybrid car. But if you're trying to do something in the 1900s, early 1900s, and make the same kind of corrections, calculations, and sort of things, that is what makes a hybrid car, very viable today, and do that with nothing but analog type of machinery, well, that's a whole nother matter to do. And although, yes, hybrids were done, and there were several different ways that they were done, and were put into production for that matter, the real challenge was the technology just wasn't there. Yeah, we could make an electric motor. Yes, we could do that. Yes, we could make a small gas engine that would power a generator. We could do that too. But those are the basic components of a proper running hybrid as we think of it today. Once you start getting to all of those little details that go into making a hybrid a true hybrid, it wasn't until the latter half of the 20th century that really the technology was in place to pull it off effectively. Okay, and another question here. I think this is this last one. Another James McCarthy question. And he says, in your opinion, what was the most complicated car from the vintage era that made it into regular production? And what made it so complicated? Oh, that's easy. The Doble Model E. That I don't think there's ever been a more complicated car built than that. Even to this day, more complicated than the Doble Model E. I mean, it's a steam car that you can pretty much drive it like a gas car, in the sense that from dead cold, you want to get rolling, within a minute you're on the road. I mean, it made steam that fast. The way it regulated its steam, the way it burned its fuel. I mean, oh my word, this thing was complicated. I mean, eventually I'll do episode on Doble and the E. I mean, he's after World. I mean, he's really after World War One. In the 1920s, where you really start seeing the Doble being prominent. But the complexity of that car and how he pulled that off. I mean, there's You know, the regulators are actually made, you know, inside the regulator are actual crystals, like quartz crystals, and it's measuring how much the quartz is change in its dimensions, you know, based on its temperature, and it's reacting, you know, and its valves are actually set to handle and deal with, you know, that minute kind of action on a 1924 car. It's an incredible car, and of course this was also extremely expensive car too. I mean, brand new out the door, one of those was almost $15,000 chassis only. So yeah, that was one complex car. Okay, Silliness, yes. Besides Bo, by the way, his full name is General Pierre Gustave Teuton Beauregard, but we just call him Bo, it's easier. Silliness, let's talk about another type of car, the Pinewood Derby car, okay, because back in 1953, the Boy Scouts of America, specifically actually the Cub Scouts of America, came up with the idea of the Pine Box Derby, which is basically take a block of wood, a piece of pine, and carve it into a little car and nail some wheels to it and run it down a track, and we'll see who wins. The idea is that the Cub Scout involved is supposed to make the car, you know, with parental supervision, and then they all get together and see who wins. Well, as it turns out, I was in Cub Scouts, and in 1976, I myself did enter a car that I made in the Pinewood Derby. And this is what I came up with. This is my Pinewood Derby car. Again, made by me in 1976. You can see my fine paint job here. Yep, it's wild, all right. 76. I'm still Wild Bill. Wild's right there. So some things never change. I don't think it won, but yeah, as I remember, I think I got like second place or something. But that is my Pinewood Derby car. How exciting is that? Woohoo! I actually still have the full thing. Okay. All right. Got a great shout out for you today, because I already know that there's quite a few folks who watch my channel that own some vintage cars, and one of the most popular ones, at least on, you know, in the United States of America, is the Ford Model A, you know, manufactured from 1928 to 32. It's an important car in our history, and if you want to know everything there is to know about a Model A, then where you need to go is the channel of Paul Shinn. Now, Paul owns Model A's, he stores Model A's, repairs Model A's, and if you have a Model A or want to have a Model A, he is definitely someone you want to talk to. In his channel, you will find so many tutorials of how-tos on anything Model A, from, you know, engine rebuilds to fixing bumpers and you know, repairing clutches, brakes, you name it. How to modify them, how to do restorations, it's all going to be there. And he's got some great resources he came up with and put together lately, so that if you have one and you need some help with a Model A, you can check his channel where you've got an email address where you can put your questions. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. So if you want to get into Model A, he's your man, that's your channel, that's definitely the first place you need to stop. All right, folks, well, that's what I had today for the old garage, and we will see you next time. Till then, peace.